thank you for having us, Canberra Modern. It's just been so fascinating so far. I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land on which we've been born, many of us here, and which we continue to live. And I want to reflect a little bit on those sorts of conversations in this little talk. My childhood world was the suburb of Campbell. In 1963, when I was born, it was new, and so was I. My experience of being born in this Canberra the year before the lake was filled, so I'm kind of like the lake was trying to be there. It was the big flood of 64, and I'm born 63. It was meant to be there in 63, but didn't come until 64. So I had a fantastic time as a young child, and then was educated here. But at 20, I got out, and I guess for many in my generation, you just couldn't get out fast enough. And if you were at a party in Sydney and someone would ask, "Where are you from?" and you'd mumble into your hand, and or else you'd go through a whole, "Oh, you poor thing" kind of conversation. So I've worked in different parts of Australia and overseas for 30 years, and now coming back to work here has prompted quite a bit of reflection. It actually began when I still wasn't back here, but my mum was still here, and I did an exhibition called Growing Up Planned, which is this one here that Roger was in, where I asked people, it was the 100th year, my mum was still in our house, and I wanted to invite some other people like myself who'd been born here and grew up here, but hadn't had left either as children or young adults. So asked them to make new work as either architects or artists or historians in response to that. So I guess I did a talk in 2018, and I guess in my role now at CMAG, I've constantly now working with this material. So that's been an interesting journey professionally. So many of us are very familiar with this. With the messaging about coming to Canberra in the mid-century, and these are just, a small sample of the kinds of images that were produced at that time, enticing families to make their lives here. But I think, from certainly just the short conversations that we've had so far tonight, the richness is actually the individuality of these stories and how we fit in. So for my own family, it was as my parents had met in Canberra in 1956 and married a year later. So they'd actually individually made their choices to be here. My mother had been a boarder at Girls' Grammar School during the war years, and then trained as a kindergarten teacher in Sydney before travelling to London and working there for a couple of years, travelling around the continent as you did. And on her return to Australia, she was anticipating working in Sydney, but an urgent call came from the newly appointed head of the fledgling education department in Canberra to urge her, as someone who had gone to school here, to come back and teach, because there were all these young families moving in with little or no family support. So at 23, she was appointed head teacher at the new Reed preschool, with its sparkling modern design set in a pretty square at the heart of the suburb. My father was born in Sydney and came to Canberra in 1951 after graduation from the University of Sydney as a dentist. At the age of 20, because he left school at 16 and 9 months, and so he went straight into dentistry and graduated at 20. So it wasn't possible to register formally until you were 21. So he found a commission at RMC Duntroon and worked as a dentist there, and moved later to Havelock House, where I many relationships would have begun in Havelock House. A keen cricketer and tennis player, he joined the Northbourne Cricket Club and went on to play opening bat with a young Bob Hawke for the ACT rep team. So that photograph there on the left, I guess I'm showing you that because I think it's that sense that, you didn't know that many people here, so you often joined clubs and societies. And I think Canberra, the story of Canberra's clubs and societies, sporting clubs, badminton, whatever it was, that was how you met people. The photograph on the other side is where they lived, in the Alloa Flats. And in fact, my father drove his car from the Alloa Flats to the Bailey Arcade where his practice was, which is, of course, is... So their choice to make their personal lives, their professional lives in Canberra, came, I guess, from being able to embrace the opportunities for young people that were possibly harder in other parts of Australia. And so from the outset, they were both strong advocates for the city and for its potential. And so my father committed to his own financial future in the city by purchasing debentures in the Bailey Arcade in its construction period. And so that was, quite a sort of financial commitment. Ooh, sorry, I'm just going backwards on my notes.
Your notes, not mine.
No. Here's Reed Preschool, and thankfully this little cubby house is still there. It's had some rather unfortunate sort of painting on that stripe. The stripes are gone, but perhaps they could be reinstated. I've got a lovely roll of these colour slides that were taken on a very, bright sunny day by a parent that were given to my mother. But this main photograph, I think, really reflects to me one of the concepts of this, of what we're talking about. These wooden blocks were actually designed by the Kindergarten Union in Canberra. They were manufactured by the woodworking teacher at the Canberra High School, and they were designed to be flexible and to be used in a whole variety of ways for educational learning. Here they are, as every child's got their own block and they're in a circle and they're playing a game. So I think that there's a lot to kind of look at in this kind of ground up knowledge about the role of design and the young mind. But at the Allawa Flats, they watched the Canberra Olympic pool come out of the ground, and they loved it. And they saved their money, and when they'd saved enough money to build, they tracked down the architect Ian Slater and commissioned him to make a house for them with a similar aesthetic, long and low, punctuated with modern details. They were also waiting for... Oh, here's another one of the Reed Preschool. They were also waiting for the suburb of Campbell to be released. They could have purchased an existing home in the already established suburbs with their predominantly, from the 20s to the 40s. However, they were really committed to contemporary architecture. And one of my father's wedding gifts to my mother was a subscription to Harper's Bazaar, but she changed it to American House and Garden, and I've got a couple of the copies here. And so for the next 5 years, she diligently clipped ideas for her future home so that when they were ready to commission the architect and got the money, there was a set of ideas ready to go. So on a cold day in 1961, it possibly was this day, my parents waited anxiously for their pick of the last block of land to be sold in a line on that day. And waiting with them was their architect, Ian Slater, who'd just left the relative anonymity of government employment and joined long-established architect Malcolm Moir in practice to form Moir and Slater. Looking at this photograph of the block of land that day, you can sort of have a sense of something of the feat of imagination that they were bringing to this moment. But actually, a few years later, the house looked like this. The garden was established, and this then was our family home for 52 years. And so I think, like other speakers who have a strong association with the house that they grew up in, it is very much a place that ends up shaping you. My brother and I, So one of the key ideas that they asked Ian Slater to do was to build an indoor-outdoor room. And here, my twin brother and I came home from the hospital in 1963, and Canberra Hospital, and my mother had a touch-and-go birthing experience. So it was a pretty phenomenal day, actually, that they chose to take this photograph of her at home with both of us. I think my father very relieved in that space there. And it became really one of the most successful features of the home, and a sheltered indoor-outdoor living space. And it became, about 7 or 8 years later, they did actually put clear alcinite over the roof and turned it into an indoor garden room, where it became a place of many parties and coming in from the pool and all of this sort of thing. I'm just right ahead. The interior of the house, these are just like a couple of little shots, but I guess these spaces also really shape you. The top left there is the, as you know, we just finished clearing out to sell it, so there's actually no furniture in it there, but it's, you can see it's timber panelled, it's white, it's got the sloping ceilings, the louvered doors, and the view out to the front. But this was that sense of that flow between the kitchen and the living room spaces, and then it was to the outside. So really very much, as the other speakers have spoken about it wasn't rooms that you closed off, it was a whole flowing space. Very common colour tile in the bathroom, that sort of greeny, that colour of the bush almost, I think, and that ochre, and so I have very vivid memories of that colour green tile. And then Ian Slater designed the second wing of the house, which was always intended to be built, because like my brother and I weren't even conceived when they first did the first half of the plan. So, when we came along, they built the second half, which is what you can see there, and then the pool. And my mother here is doing it for an architectural photography. It's there in midwinter in Canberra, and she's in the pool. That's why my brother and I are standing on the outside. But so why were they so confident in Campbell as a place? And although this is a little bit later, this is 1965, this was very much the idea of this place. So building a planned neighbourhood, permanent parkland, playing fields, tennis, pedestrian parkway, the very, very much of an emphasis of district recreational area, and then planting, you can actually see on the border there, planting was going to ring the major roads. So that this was a really commonly understood way in which a suburb was going to be developed. So for young parents, they knew that if they were going to have a family life here, that's how it was going to involve, what it was going to revolve around. So then, as a child growing up, everything was within a kilometre of walking distance. The newsagent, the grocery, the butcher, the hairdresser, the pharmacist, the tennis courts for Saturday play, and then the school from kindergarten to year 6 at Campbell Primary. They were all my immediate neighbourhood. But really another, I think, really significant thing for me as a child was this sense of the fingers of the bush right in as your direct experience. And so because I walked to school and back home every day without, it's like with other kids or on your own, it didn't matter. But you were dressed for the extremes of the season, and you could dawdle, you could muck around. And so I actually took this photograph, maybe only just a couple of years ago, but it's still the same. So bits of it are curbed and gutted, but the majority of that walk was not curbed and gutted. And so, if there was flooding or if there was dryness, you really, and a child is looking at this height, so you're walking down and looking. So I think for me that's one of the most significant things, that change within nature and a close observation for nature. And then, of course, this the ability to roam pretty much unchecked. So, even a 6 or 7-year-old to walk all the way up to the top of Mount Pleasant, that was, kind of just what you did. And like scrub like this is where you'd spend the whole day building cubby houses out there. So that was very much that kind of bush experience in the new suburbs, which I think perhaps for many is still something that you can do. This is a photograph I managed to find of, just as the lake had filled. So there's Canberra Hospital, and it's so interesting to sort of see this moment in October 1964. You can really see that not much is there at that point around the lake, and it's kind of easy to forget that it happened really suddenly. And I love that Rosalie Gascoigne title of that major work of hers, Suddenly the Lake, which I think of as both Lake George and of Lake Burley Griffin, that sense of sudden arrival of the water. And I think, Jeff, your description of how the lake, I really, that your understanding of it as a design element, I think was really interesting. So yes, Campbell was in that top corner there below Mount Pleasant. So that was really my hood. But you can just see there also the planning there for Commonwealth Park. So Commonwealth Park was, it was a little bit further away, but that crafted water play grove, the circular cast pavers, which some of them are still there, but oh God, if there's one thing that I would bring back straight away, it's the circular curved pavers, which were just so fantastic. Looking back, now in my role here, I kind of get to look at some of these archival photographs, and you realise that, because these were done by the Government Information Service, and so you kind of see your own childhood writ large in these formal photographs that were designed for, public consumption, but really realising that this was also very much your own childhood. And again, here's this landscape design about space and freedom in the suburbs. So, these are very much, designed for wider circulation, but they were also very much my own personal experience. And my mother had been photographed for the Government Information Service when teaching at Reeds. I won't show you those, but we've got 10 of those, and our own house appeared in the NCDC annual report of 1965 as an example of private enterprise building. In 1967, my brother and I were photographed by David Moore with the newly launched decimal currency for a commission spread in National Geographic. So November 1967, that's me and my brother in when the Mint was launching its decimal currency. I wanted to turn to, looking in a bit more detail at the design for educational spaces. Because education really was promoted to families as a real kind of message about the kind of future for your family in Canberra was really built on quality educational, not only the spaces but the curriculum. So this is the kind of sort of narratives that you'd get in those magazines. Interesting to reflect on the speed with which play changed. These photographs, the colour ones from 1955 of my mother's preschool, show this kind of quite gendered, stereotypical play of the girls in the cubby house with the dolls and the prams and so on. But very shortly afterwards, innovation happens quickly, and this is 1972, and I was in the first of the the first open plan classroom in Canberra. And so being part of that, experimental learning environment had a huge impression on me. I remember in grade 3, an ABC film crew coming in to film us and being, chosen to be one of the children that they were going to focus on. And here it was two teachers taught 2 classes of children who were each assigned their own sheet of activities for the week to undertake at their own pace through formal and informal small group or individual learning modules. And this is the plans for that space. So here's Campbell Primary pretty much today. It hasn't changed. Didn't look like it's changed that much. And what has changed are the demountables. When I was growing up there, it was a forest of demountables around this, but of course they're gone now. But so there was the conversion of this general craft space into this open plan learning. And the experiment was led by a senior educational manager and now retired local historian Alan Foskett, who was given the opportunity of a 6-week trip through Europe in 1971 to visit cutting-edge educational initiatives and bring some of those findings back to Canberra. His report was immediately and enthusiastically taken up by several primary schools who asked for the same resources and classroom design. And so, actually in that one there, you can see the letter, open plan learning for existing primary schools. Department has been approached by various older primary schools, blah, blah, blah. The following list is approached. So Aranda, Campbell, Downer, Hackett, Lyons, North Ainslie, North Curtin, Page, Watson and Yarralumla. It's saying it's not comprehensive. They all want to do it. Your early advice would be appreciated. So the kind of speed with which these sort of new ideas for learning were taken up when, I guess most schools still operated on those strict rows and individual seats and tables that you built up. Lift it up. But it sort of went further, and I think that teachers were also really encouraged to be innovative themselves and work with the architectural spaces. In my mother's archive, I found this really a short-lived journal that was published in Canberra called Early Years, and individual teachers could talk about different projects that they were doing. And this concrete poetry workshop that was done, I've cut up the school it was in, but here was an English teacher, a general primary school teacher, creating a program of poetry in relation to the architectural spaces that they were working in. Oh, sorry, it's Revette, 1975. Of course, this having the yeah. Dame Patty Menzies is said to have been a strong advocate for the needs of children and families in Canberra to her husband, the Prime Minister. We've had some recent conversations about that, haven't we, about the role of the Prime Minister's wife. And the citizen child, such as myself, also had the opportunity to visit the well-stocked local library and a particular Canberra activity of going to open days at the embassies and consulates, exhibitions at the National Library and the Academy of Science. And it was always a thrill to see Farlap's, or slightly gross though, Farlap's heart at the Academy of Science. And most of these trips would involve usually a take-home brochure that could be cut up for your school projects. So these are the kinds of play structures that we could, be, and thankfully the David Tolley one is still there. I think some of them are no longer there. And this was my own, again, this is my own experience at the Canberra, at the Civic Pool. I'm there in the blue, my brother, and Tookie Wright, who still lives in Canberra, and her brother and cousins. So you could kind of have this freewheeling childhood experience.
No sunblock.
No sunblock.
They're all very brown.
Oh, yeah. But I also vividly recall some of the art that I was exposed to, and I suppose this then comes to where my own professional career has gone in, and being primarily a visual art curator, but also in design and architecture. I vividly recall seeing this production of the Australian Ballet in 1968 at the Canberra Theatre, but also Ava Pachuca's this incredible exhibition of woven human forms in the life-size figures in the centre gallery. That photograph is actually taken from they're now in the collection of the National Gallery, but I would have been about 8 or 9. Extremely vivid memories of seeing that installation. Driving out to see the new Nolan at Lanyon Gallery with my mother in the Mini, all the way to Tuggeranong. My God, that was like the end of
a picnic to go out there.
And the little Mini made it out there. But that was really special to see that. And I just recently took some photographs of some of the posters in the basement of the Canberra Theatre and came across this one of this Polish theatre in 1978. And so Canberra was a place that you could see such things because of the federal government money that paid for that level of activity. But there was also, art was in the suburbs too, and this is the poster from Australia 75, which was, I guess, one of the biggest festival event that Canberra has perhaps ever seen. But it's interesting to see that all of those, that art activity is all in the suburbs. This is obviously before the National Gallery was opened. Another cute one, I have to tell you. The so-called space age. This was, something that was very vivid, I'm sure, in our imaginations about the space race. And we had the Metas oven for the whole of the 52 years that and it was called the space age, the oven. But the irony of it was, my mother's selection of, petit four tins, because she was the homemaker and had the, did the entertaining. So kind of, there was a little bit of an irony there. But as kids, of course, the obsession with space and space culture was huge. So I guess I guess one of the impacts on that has been just an ongoing interest in how kind of future technology kind of shapes you. But really, it wasn't. There was a lot missing in what we were experiencing as children, and it was really only, when I started going to university in 1981, and I would walk from my bus into the campus, and I started to see these incredible posters, and suddenly the world became a much bigger place, and the access to ideas, but also that the recognition that, other people were struggling in my own community, and across the world became much more vividly into focus. And I think particularly this work of artists who were starting the poster collectives had a huge impact on me. And I also remember family friend Dr. Michael Denborough led the first anti-nuclear one of the big anti-nuclear demonstrations on ANU campus in 1962. So I guess the differences, when I reflect back on it, had only become more real when visiting other places. And a very clear memory is probably a 5-year-old when driving through the beachside suburbs of Coogee to visit my father's parents, and seeing a range of buildings and cars going everywhere from the back seat, and being a little bit confronted by all this. I expressed with some kind of awed surprise at how busy and confusing Sydney was, and clearly remember my mother saying with slight disdain, "Yes, Sydney has grown like Topsy." The clear premise was that Canberra was a much better place to live. But I think the greatest absence was a recognition of the culture and the ongoing presence and significance of local Aboriginal people. This is something that I had to go 10,000 miles away to understand. And I've now become quite deeply affected through my work in meeting and working with Aboriginal artists, and to research items in the CMAG collection. And one of them is this little set of plastic plates, and with my colleague Sita, who's here, that were done in Gungahlin in 1996. So when Gungahlin was being developed as a future suburb, there was a community arts project that invited Aboriginal artists with community artists to look at where scar trees were, and actually some of the significant roads and so on for that suburb were altered to align with where some of the scar trees were. So it has been interesting to kind of look at some of these objects. So in conclusion, I just wondered, is it possible to reflect now on the impact, on the emphasis of using such sort of cutting-edge design to shape individual and community life in Canberra? I wonder that for a child like me, and perhaps others on this panel, the mid-century design approach of space, openness, accessibility and newness encouraged us to be a bit independent, to be open to new ideas and be self-directed. This is obviously a completely non-scientific observation, and I look forward to reflecting on this with you. But the significance of this conversation, I think, is not that we can wallow in some sort of personal nostalgic bubble, but to help contribute these reflections on our recent heritage to help shape current thinking. If any of our experience, I think, collectively here, I think they speak to the formative importance of design for the built environment, for the landscape, for the educational and informal learning experiences. And with our experiences, can we influence thinking on the needs and on what needs to be done to help continue to make Canberra a special and unique place to grow up? Thank you.